So welcome to Marginal Ecologies, a conference organized jointly by the School of Human Ecology and the Equal project at Ambedkar University, Delhi. So there's a mix of some people from the outside and some from within AUD. So a bit of what I'll say is redundant for those who are insiders, but maybe an occasion like this actually allows you to step back a little and recap where we are coming from to actually land up in this space at this point of time. Perhaps even, even to me, it's actually interesting to recap that path that we followed. So AUDs, as we all know, it's a very new university on the landscape of Delhi. It's a Delhi state government university set up through an act of the legislature of the National Capital Territory of Delhi. And the School of Human Ecology is one of the earliest of one of the first 3 schools set up in AUD. So we've been around, we've graduated 4 batches of MA students now. And in that sense, it's a very interesting moment for us in the School of Human Ecology, because we've moved from, the very early phases of developing this school and our programs to a place where we can look back a little and then look ahead and see where we're going. So AUD, as we're very fond of saying everywhere, has some sort of guiding principles that keep coming up in every such meeting. And the first one, because of our very name, we derive inspiration from Dr. Ambedkar, and the idea of the university was to match higher excellence in higher education with the ideals of social justice. So access and balancing that with success in academics. The other sort of guiding principle that AUD took upon itself was to practice engaged scholarship, not just sit in ivory towers, but actually get our hands dirty, be able to do stuff that contributes in a very hands-on way to pressing social issues. And that kind of automatically led the university to start interesting interdisciplinary programs. So interdisciplinarity is the third thing that the university has tried very actively to practice. And I would think that the School of Human Ecology in some sense, fits all these, checks these 3 mandates quite nicely. So SHE basically focuses our teaching and research and field action. All 3 things basically try and locate ourselves on the cusp of environment and society interactions with certain principles that we sort of take very, we've internalized into our work. The first one, of course, is that since AUD focuses on engaged scholarship, our programs are very, very hands-on and field-based. So field engagement is something that is a part of the teaching programs also, not just of the research and action that faculty and researchers do, but also of the teaching programs themselves. And the other thing that we've very consciously tried to do is to balance disciplinary rigor and depth with pushing the envelope, pushing the boundaries of disciplines. And the faculty composition itself kind of reflects that. We've, no 2 people have similar degrees in the 6-member SHE faculty right now. And even if they have similar degrees, the experiences and the sort of orientations we bring to our work are very interesting. So when you go out into the poster session and look at the student talks and also some of our own work when we present, that kind of comes out. And it's been very enriching for all of us also to learn from each other. And in that sense, this conference came together through such a process over the past 4 to 5 years, where we've tried to put together our MA program, the flagship MA program, which is the Masters in Environment and Development. And in doing so, worked with each other and come out with, very interesting new ways of thinking. Some of us began collaborating with each other. Students began working with us. And then when we tried to put together a conference like this today, where, we said, okay, let's see what are the things we really do and how do we put them together. We were just discussing that it sort of seems to have come together quite nicely. So Marginal Ecology is working on the margins, working in an interdisciplinary manner, and with with a focus on scale being very important. So on the one hand, we link two larger global issues of environment and development. But on the other hand, we go right down into the details of the nitty-gritty of what is happening. So, you have panels which are focusing on regions, and within regions, very detailed sort of nuts and bolts kind of work. But the attempt would be throughout the conference to try and also zoom out from there. So, sort of zooming in, zooming out, and also trying to figure out the puzzles in between in that endeavor. So, as you know, this is a 3-day conference. On the first 2 days, we have the 4 panels, the details of which are in this handout that's with you. And along with the 2 panels, today we have the plenary lecture by Nitin Sethi towards the afternoon. And on the after the sessions tomorrow, which are the panel sessions, we also have a student session where PhD students and master's students who've just passed out will be presenting their work. And on the 3rd day, we actually want to engage in a little more detail in a more reflective exercise with Project Equal, which is this consortium project that SHE is involved with, on the challenges of interdisciplinarity, the pedagogical challenges of interdisciplinarity, and some new things that we are trying by way of blended learning and online educational resources. So even there we are engaging with this issue of scale. So this is one place that is trying to do these things. Can we expand, use technology in order to expand these learnings to a much wider set of people? So I'll definitely not want to be accused of standing between you and interesting panelists. And so and I think it's a group too large now for a round of introductions, but when we break in between, we'll probably on the side do those introductions. But it's my pleasure to introduce to you the 4 panelists on the Central India panel, which will begin: Dr. Richa Kumar, Dr. Nandini Nayak, Ritu, and Sagar Tiwari. A small gift from SHE to begin with as an introduction. And Buddhaditya, who's the student, the research scholar in charge of this panel. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Asmita. It's really a pleasure to be here and be, in a sense, back at Ambedkar University. I spent a very short amount of time here some years back when it was being set up, and it's great to see how far it's come and the kind of interdisciplinary field-based work that is being conducted here, both by faculty as well as students. So it's really, truly an honor and a pleasure to be invited and to be back here to be able to share my work. And the paper I'm sort of going to be presenting today is something that I actually haven't presented anywhere else yet. So I'm very keen, in fact, to hear your responses, to hear your questions and comments. To a certain degree, there are some very provocative claims, at least challenging some very typical understandings of intermediaries, market intermediaries in particular. And so from your own field experiences and from your own research, it would be nice to know what you all think and where I can possibly improve what I'm trying to do here. I'll begin actually by a quick little story. And the stories of this trader, this village, and let me also make it clear, I'm focusing today on intermediaries who are at the village level. Village or maybe, block level, not at intermediaries who are at the district level or at the state level. They're looking at markets. And so I'll begin with the story of this one trader who is in this little block headquarters in Dhar district. And his name was Prithvirat Singhal, and I got to know of him when I started my fieldwork as this person जिसने दिवालिया निकाल दिया था. In the sense, I mean, उसका दिवालिया निकल गया था, but basically उसने सबका दिवालिया निकाल दिया था. Meaning that, he was this trader who had, the idea was that people would go and sell their crop to him, whatever it was, wheat, soybean, whatever else they were, they would produce. And then he would wait and keep it with him, and then he would pay them the money whenever at some point of time in the future. And this kind of relationship had been continuing for years and years and years. People told me for at least 100 years his family has been here, and we've been doing this with him. And one fine day he just sort of disappeared with like several crores of people's money. And so there were, of course, two stories to it. One was that he's actually become bankrupt and, he's disappeared. Well, so he went to jail for a very short bit of time and then he came out and then his family disappeared. And the other is that, he was actually a very, very successful banya trader. In that, he actually very successfully was able to take people's money, stash it away somewhere very far away from Dhar, and left no paper record, no trail. And so, he basically, is now risen up in life and is doing wonderful things. And this one farmer also told me that, Baniya families, in fact, look for people like this, jinhone Diwaliya nikal diya hai, because then, clearly those are the places where they need to get their daughters married into, because that's where the prosperity really lies. So anyway, I begin with this story to just give you a sense of the context, and this happened in 2005. So not very much, not in antiquity or not very, very long ago. This is a very 21st century kind of example. But it captures very well the sort of notion we have about intermediaries and traders. These people are corrupt, they're not, there's no accountability, they basically exploit farmers, and pretty much farmers are in the clutches of these intermediaries, and we have to do something about it. And the Indian state, and not just the Indian state, but in general, there have been several attempts to try and reduce the power, as they say, of these intermediaries, their power to basically be unaccountable in any way and follow their corrupt practices. And I'm going to focus on sort of two such attempts which were made in Malwa, in this region. One by the state and one by the market. And that's why, it sort of fits into this panel very nicely, because I'm looking at a state intervention, which is this cooperative, marketing cooperative, and I'm looking at this market intervention, or a private intervention, one can say, which is this company, which also tried to create a marketing intervention, both at the village level, of course, at higher levels in the marketing chain also, but I focus on the village today, to talk about how formal institutions try to change the scenario such that there is less corruption and there is more accountability towards farmers. Sort of those are the two planks on which these formal marketing institutions sit upon. That we will offer a service which is, more honest, more fair. Fairness is a very important idea in all of this, and which is more accountable to the needs of farmers. And of course more accountable, since it's a formal organization, accountable both upwards as well as downwards. So accountable upwards to the organization and accountable downwards to the constituents who are the farmers. And again, the idea here is that since this is a formal organization, whoever is managing that organization at the village level is has to follow certain kinds of rules and regulations that either the cooperative or the company may have promulgated, and that both the cooperative and the company would have certain mechanisms to reduce, if any, if there are corrupt practices, then at least to nip them in the bud or to remove people from the position that they're in. Various other actions could be taken against people who are following these kinds of corrupt practices, and that's where then the accountability would be, because if you can remove someone from the system who is being corrupt, then you are being accountable to your interests downwards as well as upwards. So that's broadly the idea. And so what I'm going to sort of do next is give you some kind of an understanding of the three, two interventions and the existing scenarios. So who are these traders, these unlicensed sort of exploitative traders? What is this cooperative that, what did it try to do, and what is a company? And once I give you a little quick snapshot of the three, and due to paucity of time, unfortunately, I won't go into a great deal of information about the three entities, but really I'm more interested in how they've played out in terms of relationships with farmers and what outcomes that has actually had. So there are at least three kinds of traders that we are talking about here, these unlicensed traders or intermediaries. One is someone like Prithvirat Singhal, whose story I began with. So these guys are pretty much at the block level, not really at the district level, so they're not part of the mandi system, the formal mandi system as we have. They're below them or outside the mandi system. Their turnover is probably not as much as the big mandi traders, so their turnover is again less. They have no license and they are doing all of this fairly illegally. But they are all over the place. In Madhya Pradesh, of course, in many other parts of the country. And their persistence is something that needs to be explained. You know, why is it that despite having a formal government marketing system, which is the mandi system, which is theoretically supposed to meet the needs of everybody, that you have these huge numbers of unregulated traders with whom farmers are quite willingly entering into exchange and transactions with? So that's something, you know, I will at the end of the talk try and give some kind of answer to that question. Then you have another category of traders who are these traveling purchasers, and maybe some of you may have heard the term padya. And so this padya is a guy who basically has no equipment, except for a little weighing scale and a little jute bag on their back, and that's what they travel around on a motorcycle or something. And then they'll spread it out on the ground, their mat, and then they'll buy, you know, 2 kg, 5 kg, 10 kg, 20 kg, very, very, very small amounts of stuff from different people, amalgamate it all together. Once they have got 1 jute bag or 2 jute bags, they'll go and sell it to a bigger trader. So that's the padya. And then you have the third category who are actually not full-time traders. These are part-time traders who are essentially shopkeepers or some other kind of retailers at the village level, where they will also buy agricultural commodities, but in even smaller quantities. So they'll buy like 1 cup of wheat or like half a glass of soybean or something like that, essentially as a way to exchange. Basically, you want to buy biscuits or you want to buy sugar or something, then you can, you know, give us half a cup of soybean and, you know, you can get this quantity of sugar from the shop. So to facilitate those kinds of transactions, so they'll accumulate it bit by bit by bit. Again, once they have half a bag or a bag, they may give it to a padya or they may give it to a suvalal or somebody else. That's basically the 3 categories of traders that you have. Now, let me get to the cooperative. The cooperative that I'm talking about is the Madhya Pradesh Oilseed Growers Federation, which was this marketing cooperative started in 1979 by the state government in Madhya Pradesh. And the idea was at that point of time to provide farmers with a marketing facility at the village level. So you don't need to take your, and this was specifically for soybean, and you know, there are all these reasons why it was started to sort of encourage the spread of soybean, to provide, you know, a better marketing environment for farmers. This was sort of along the lines of Amul and various other things that were going on in the 1970s at that time. But ultimately, the structure of this was pretty much like a regular village cooperative, that you have members, farmer members, who would pool together some kind of money at the beginning, which is the Ansh Punji, as it's called, which is what the cooperative would start with, and then the federation would provide them with some more money. And they would have a secretary who would manage the day-to-day affairs of the cooperative, and then they would have a president. The secretary would be appointed by the district level federation, and then the president would be elected from amongst the cooperative members. And since this was all at the village level, the idea was that these people are buying the soybean, in this case, of their own fellow members. So there would be some kind of accountability or some kind of kin-related accountability to your fellow villagers, that you wouldn't want to cheat a fellow villager. And there would also be some kind of accountability through the rules of the cooperative, because there were very specific rules about how the secretary would be appointed, how the secretary would be removed, how the day-to-day functioning would be. And the job of the secretary was basically to do what these traders are doing, in a sense: purchase soybean and weigh the soybean, grade the soybean. So that's very important. Remember, anytime you go and sell something as a farmer, you're not just selling stuff, you're also selling a particular quality of stuff. And so that quality has to be determined, and based on that quality, the price of that commodity will be determined, and then the secretary would organize for the payment. And the payment would actually come via check through the main headquarters, and then the secretary would manage all the work in the back end. The secretary would get paid a salary, a regular salary per month, and then whatever commissions that the organization made, because the Oil Federation was in fact a very large organization that would be purchasing all the soybean from different villages. It would be processing it in its processing factories, and then it would be exporting a part of it. So it was a big enterprise, vertically integrated. And so whatever profits came into the organization were also then passed down to the village societies as dividends. And so the secretary and of course the farmer members would also get some kind of dividends. So the secretary had the salary and then the dividend component of being part of the organization, which would, again, I'm highlighting this because it's very different from a trader, an unlicensed trader, because a trader is essentially interested in profit. And the more, in terms of, if you look at the incentives for a trader, the more a trader pursues corrupt practices, So underways, for example, that's a very common thing. Or that the trader gives a rating of poor quality to something that is actually of better quality. So if the trader conducts those kinds of practices, the trader is able to increase his or her own profit. In this case, mostly his own profit. I didn't come across a single woman trader in the system. But for a secretary, there is no real advantage in being able to do that, because you have, on the one hand, you have a fixed salary, and on the other hand, the more soybean you're able to purchase and process through the system, and the health of the bigger organization depends on the kind of dividends that you will get. And so the incentive, in a sense, is not to cheat the system, but to make the system work as well as it can. Now the company, the Chopal that I'm talking about. So this is an intervention that was started in 2000 by ITC IBD, which is this large FMCG company and tobacco company, but it also has a large agri-business division. And their aim was again to increase the amount of procurement that they were getting from these villages, and so they also started these village internet centers. And instead of a secretary, they had someone called a Sanchalak. And the job of the Sanchalak was again very, very similar, at least in the beginning, to purchase soybean from farmers and to establish what is the quality, and then to give them what would be the price based on what the company has sort of told them, to weigh all of that and then send it off to the company. So in a sense, in fact, when I started my research by looking at the Chopals actually, and when I started that research, people told me actually this is Chopal and all, but basically it's the same thing that the Oil Federation was doing 20 years back. And so they're just trying to do it in a more modern sense. They've got these computers and they're trying to, use technology to, conduct these transactions. So broadly speaking, it's a very similar thing to the Oil Federation. And the Sanchalak, again, in this case, would receive a commission for every quintal of soybean that was sent to the company. So again, there is no profit, remember, in this case, because the company is paying for all the transportation costs and various other things. There's only a commission that a person is getting in the in the process. So once again, the point here, or the argument that is made usually by these formal marketing institutions, is that since there is no profit motive as such, personal profit motive, and you're embedded within a formal system, then the opportunities for corruption are less, and the opportunities for accountability are far more, in making sure that the system serves the needs of farmers. Okay, so let me now get into what basically to the three main arguments of my paper. How much time do I have?
15 minutes is up.
Oh, it's already up.
Yeah.
Great. So now I've only just set up the scene. Okay, let me then quickly get into the three main arguments that I have. The first argument that I'm talking about is that is basically the argument about accessibility. So whose needs is it that these formal marketing organizations are fulfilling? So the argument made by these formal institutions is that since they are going all the way to the village level, basically they're trying to meet the needs of those farmers who find it very hard to leave the village and sell their stuff outside of the village. Because if you're a farmer who can actually reach the mandi, then you don't really have that much of a pressing need of an organization to buy at the village level itself. But if you are a small and marginal farmer, if you are typically a lower caste farmer, if you're an Adivasi farmer, that's when you have the need. You probably can't afford the transportation of your stuff to anywhere outside the village, and this kind of an institution is going to help you the most. At least that's the theoretical argument behind all of the investment and all of the infrastructure that is established at the village level to make something like this work. But if you look at both these institutions, the cooperative society as well as the Chopal, there are in fact structural constraints that exclude precisely this group from participation entirely. So the cooperative, for example, you require, to become a member of the cooperative, you require some kind of land in your name, because you have to, your Ansh Punji or your contribution depends on the amount of land that you have in your name. Now in Malwa, for those of you who are familiar with this region, the history of land settlement here in the last 200 years has basically ensured that lower caste groups and Adivasi groups have essentially been disenfranchised from their land. So the land that these people commonly cultivated in the past was forcibly taken away from them. You have Rajput, Maratha and Patidar farmers who've basically come in the last 200 years who've been farming this land thanks to land grants by various princely state rulers in this region, Maratha and Rajput rulers. And those are the ones pretty much who are members of the oilseed cooperatives. I looked at records of the cooperative books in terms of trying to see who are the people who have sold, and particularly in the village where I was doing my research. And there's only one Adivasi family on the books from 1980 onwards, when the cooperative began, even though there were several Adivasi families in the village who had in fact been given land under the land redistribution drives of the 1970s. So none of those are in fact selling to the cooperative, at least not in the formal sense. And part of the reason, there are a variety of reasons that I'll speculate on, but another feature of the cooperative is that you don't get your payment immediately in cash. Your payment comes in check at a minimum of 10 days later. So that becomes another constraint for those farmers who are interested in, most farmers would like cash immediately, and so you need to have some kind of staying capacity to be able to wait for your payment coming after 10 days. So structurally, in a sense, at least these two things, and there are some others, which would exclude that, precisely that category of people whom these cooperatives are trying to target from being able to access the services of the cooperative. If you look at the Chopal, on the other hand, in this case, we need to look at who is the Sanchalak who is chosen to manage the cooperative, to manage the Chopal at the village level. And if you look at the very beginning, so when ITC IBD started this project, they basically asked their own commission agents and traders to pick the Sanchalaks. So the first 100 Sanchalaks out of about 1,300 or so were basically the village sarpanch. Many of them were in fact village traders themselves who became Sanchalaks. So if you remember Prithvirat Singhal, whose story I began with, he was in fact a Sanchalak for the Chopal. And eventually, of course, the company realized that this is not making sense. They're not doing exactly what they are expected to do. So they came up with this very elaborate criteria about choosing a Sanchalak. What's that criteria? You need to have a pakka house. You need to have a telephone. You need to have one member of your family who's educated. And you need to have, you need to be from the dominant caste. And you also need to be socially influential in your village. But at the same time, you need to be apolitical. Now, of course, a very quick perusal of this criteria and looking at the social demography of Madhya Pradesh, it's very clear that very, very few people at in any given village will in fact be able to qualify. In most cases, probably one or two families may be able to qualify to become a Sanchalak, typically the most powerful families in the village. Okay. So the point here being, or at least the first argument that I was trying to make, is that it matters who is the secretary and who is the Sanchalak. And the groups that these formal institutions, the groups which they're trying to target, it's not obvious or automatic that simply by putting a formal institution in the village, that automatically the needs of those groups are also going to be fulfilled, because it depends upon the social relationship that the secretaries and the Sanchalaks have with those marginal groups. To what degree their needs can be fulfilled will depend on how well the secretary and the Sanchalak are in fact able to circumvent the formal system and then buy quantities in the smaller amount of quantities and make the payments in cash that most of these groups will require. So again, the bigger point that I'm trying to make in this first argument is that for these formal marketing institutions to service the needs of the marginal groups that we are talking about, the formal marketing institution employees have to circumvent the rules and regulations and behave like a village trader, to circumvent the rules of payment, to circumvent the rules of the transaction in terms of the lot size that they can purchase, and basically underwriting the rules of accountability that those organizations are essentially propped up upon. Because then you get into the realm of informal transactions, which then again are similarly unaccountable and similarly prone to all kinds of corrupt practices, which was seen in both these cases. Do I have time to make that other big second argument? Can I ask for 5 minutes?
You just get less questions.
Okay. Let me at least at least throw it out there. The big second argument that I'm trying to make goes back to Prithvirat Singhal story. It's really trying to understand the persistence of these other kinds of traders in the region. And this is something, it's in a sense very counterintuitive, because my own understanding of market intermediaries when I started out was that typical Prithvirat Singhal story. That's how traders behave. And my own understanding of farmers' marketing practices was how economists tell us, the farmer, there are all these debates in economics, but basically, you have a rational, utility maximizing individual who is going to go out there and sell his or her crop for the highest market price whenever possible. So basically, when the farmer has got his crop from the field, the main interest of the farmer is ensuring how I can dispose of this entire thing at the highest price ever possible, and then, that's it. Then I'm done with my market transaction. Again and again, throughout my fieldwork, what I found was that actually it doesn't at all explain what farmers do. So farmers very, very rarely go out and sell their entire crop in one transaction at one point of time. What they instead do is sell whatever amount of the crop they need to service whatever cash needs they have at that point of time. And that explains the behavior of the smallest and marginal farmers as well as the largest farmers. So a smaller farmer or a marginal farmer typically would have debt at the time of harvest, and so they would have to sell whatever they have to be able to clear the debt or to be able to get another loan or whatever else they may need. A farmer who has slightly more staying capacity would sell the proportion that is required, for example, to buy pesticides for the next crop, maybe to pay an electricity bill, maybe to, there is an illness in the family, so for whatever that. So they would sell maybe half a bag, 2 bags, half a trolley. A larger farmer would in fact sit on the entire crop for how much ever time possible. There's a wedding, so then some of that crop may be taken out and then sold. There is some other expenditure, unless there's a larger farmer who is in fact doubling up as a money lender or something. So typically farmers only sold what they needed for cash, given that there was a corresponding expenditure associated with it. What was the logic behind this? The logic basically was that if I, as a farmer, if I held my savings in the form of cash, basically I would lose it by tomorrow. There would be enough other people in the village, including my family, who would make claims upon it for all kinds of things. So this farmer told me, my children will ask for new clothes, my wife will ask for new utensils, my fellow brothers will come and ask me for loans, and basically I will have no money left. And for that purpose, I need to ensure if I need to have some kind of savings, and I have to keep it either in my house as stuff which is not, so I can tell them I haven't sold my wheat, so obviously I have no money, I can't give you anything. But so this is where the role of the traders comes in, where you can give it to Suvalal, and Suvalal will make the payment to you at any point of the time in the future in how much ever amount that you wanted for the purpose that you need it for. Of course, these are very sophisticated transactions, including interest and various other things. But the point basically which I'll end with is that the activities of traders like Suvalal cannot be understood simply within this exploitative framework and corrupt framework that these guys are simply out to, take out all of this stuff from farmers, but that there are actual needs of farmers who are not these, rational utility maximizing individuals in vacuum, that their transactions are within this very important socio-cultural context, which explains the kinds of needs that they have, which these formal marketing institutions at no point of time are they able to even grasp or try to figure out mechanisms to help farmers with certain kinds of needs like this, which is why you have people like Suvalal who still continue to persist in Malwa today. That's it. Thank you, and I'm so sorry for going over time.
We have 4 minutes for questions. 4 minutes for questions.
Okay, we can take probably one. Panelists have privileges also. Any questions? Okay.
Hi, I'm Rachna, and I'm an independent researcher. My question comes from what you said later about rational activity maximization. Do you think instead of cash, the need to have instant cash or lack of need to have instant cash makes the space for people like Suvalal to thrive? One. And instead of ITC kind of a mechanism or cooperative kind of a mechanism, or within both these institutions or mechanisms, can one build something like a grain bank sort of a thing? Something where if they have surplus grain or whatever the grain is there, because see, ideally if they are storing,
I'll have to request you to please keep it short. She has 2 minutes now to answer.
Thank you. Can something like grain bank be worked out? Or is there a need? can there be a need for something like a grain bank?
So clearly there is a need for something here that formal institutions are not able to fulfill. The one example I had was of the warehouse receipt system. So that's another thing that the government has instituted. Again, it suffers from the same kind of structural constraints that the cooperatives and the chopals do. You need to have 100 bags to be able to store in the warehouse. And 100 bags means you have to be a minimum 6-hectare farmer with 16 quintals of production, which puts it out of the reach of 75% of the people who are in Malwa who are farming. So again, if you, the disconnect here is between trying to service the needs of a particular class of farmers and setting up institutions that structurally fail to address or either exclude them or structurally fail to address the needs of those kinds of farmers. I mean, in the sense, warehouse receipts in fact are servicing the needs of traders and not the needs of farmers at all.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
Richa.
you.
We'll have to wrap this up. But there is a lunch session during which I think I have questions also. I'll now ask Dr. Nandini Kumar from the School of Development Studies, Nandini Nayak, sorry, from the School of Development Studies, AUD, to present her paper.